When did a teacher's lesson go way too far? My teacher forced me to disobey her one rule so she could fail me. If you are not seated when the bell stops ringing, you are absent for the entire day. Julian raised his hand from the third row. His voice cracked slightly. What about emergencies or plan better? The silence that followed felt like the moment before a car crash. You see it coming but can't stop the momentum. Ellison walked to her desk and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Policy amendments typed on official district letterhead. New procedures that turn teachers into judges. She read each clause like she was handing down prison sentences. No parental notes accepted for tardiness. No medical exemptions processed day of. Midterm exams missed due to tardiness receive automatic zeros with no makeup opportunities. I watched my friend Riley calculate disaster in her head. Her bus ran late twice a week because the driver stopped for coffee. One unlucky morning could crater her entire semester. The wall clock ticked past 8:52. Ellison's eyes followed the second hand like she was timing a bomb. This policy takes effect immediately. Tomorrow morning I suggest arriving early. She smiled at us then. The kind of smile that says the game just changed and only one player knows the new rules. My scholarship applications sat in my backpack. Perfect grades for 3.5 years. College acceptance letters that mentioned my academic consistency. The state merit scholarship required maintaining a 3.8 GPA through graduation. 1-0 would make that mathematically impossible. Sarah Ortega sat 2 rows over. Straight A student since freshman year. Her MIT application was pending. A single blemish could shift her from acceptance to waitlist. Behind me, David Rodriguez breathed too heavily. His family was counting on his academic scholarship to afford college. No backup plan existed if his GPA dropped. Ellison gathered her papers while we filed out in unusual silence. The normal post-class chatter died completely. No one discussed weekend plans or complained about homework. We moved through the hallway like survivors leaving a disaster zone. 3 days later, the hallway outside room 237 looked like an airport terminal during flight delays. Students camped on the linoleum floor with backpacks as pillows, coffee cups cooling in their hands, portable chargers snaking between bodies. I arrived at 6:50 a.m. and counted 15 people already waiting. The earliest arrival had been there since 6:30, wrapped in a winter coat and studying chemistry flashcards. Ellison's classroom door stayed locked until 8:35 exactly. She'd walked past us twice during her morning routine. First trip carried her coffee and gradebook. Second trip involved the copy room and whatever mysterious preparations she performed there. Each time she'd nod approvingly at our lineup. Good planning, she said to no one in particular. My daily schedule collapsed around the new reality. Lunch shortened to 15 minutes of inhaling cafeteria food. Drama club meetings skipped entirely. The part-time job at Miller's Hardware shifted to weekends only. Everything sacrificed to guarantee an 8:49 arrival in Ellison's classroom. Riley showed up at 7:20 with printed backup routes. 3 different bus schedules color-coded by reliability. Her mom's work number programmed into speed dial for emergency rides. The group chat shared weather alerts and traffic updates in real time. Someone posted construction notices that could delay the 42 bus route. Another kid mapped every bathroom between the parking lot and Ellison's door. We turned academic survival into a precision science. By Monday, half the senior class had modified their entire lives around one teacher's power trip. Parents adjusted work schedules to provide backup transportation. Students quit jobs that ended too late the night before. Study groups moved to early morning sessions in the hallway outside Ellison's room. Ellison had trained us to fear time itself. Tuesday morning arrived with the promise of our calculus midterm, the test that would determine 40% of our quarter grade, the exam that could make or break scholarship eligibility. I sat against my usual spot on the wall at 7 a.m., earlier than normal because midterm anxiety had destroyed my sleep schedule completely. Ellison unlocked her door at exactly 8:35. The stampede was quiet but urgent, 20 bodies flowing through a single doorway, everyone claiming their assigned seats. She arranged papers on her desk while we settled in, the same morning ritual she'd performed for 15 years. Coffee cup positioned at 2 o'clock, red pen uncapped and ready. But something felt different today. She kept glancing at the wall clock, checking her watch, like she was waiting for a specific moment to arrive. The rest of us had learned to read her moods. The way she tapped her fingers meant pop quiz. Aggressive paper shuffling meant someone was about to get called out for late homework. This morning she seemed focused, almost excited, like a hunter waiting for the perfect shot. At 8:42, Ellison looked directly at me and smiled. I need 5 extra exam booklets from the copy room right now. Everyone already had a booklet on their desk. The midterm materials had been distributed yesterday afternoon. We'd all checked our supplies twice. Extra copies made absolutely no sense. But arguing with Ellison was academic torture. I grabbed the hall pass and headed for the door. The plastic felt warm from nervous sweat. The copy room sat at the far end of the building, past the main office with its secretary who never looked up, around 2 corners through the science wing, down a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner. The machine was already running when I arrived, someone else's job feeding paper into the copier. The progress display showed 127 copies remaining. I waited while it collated and stapled with mechanical precision. Each sheet took an eternity to process. 8:44 showed on the wall clock, then 8:45, then 8:46. My chest started to feel tight. Ellison's class began in 4 minutes. The walk back would take at least 3 if I moved fast. The copier finally finished with a satisfied beep. I grabbed the warm booklets and ran. The hallway stretched longer than usual. My footsteps echoed off empty lockers. Every second felt like betting against time itself. I reached Ellison's door at 8:49 exactly. Turned the handle with confidence. Locked. Through the safety glass with its wire mesh pattern, I could see inside. Ellison standing at the front of the room. 23 students bent over their desks in perfect silence. The midterm had already begun. I knocked on the door with my knuckles. Sharp, urgent raps against the glass. Ellison looked up slowly, made direct eye contact with me through the window. Her expression showed no surprise, no concern, no recognition that anything unusual was happening. Then she turned back to her students like I was invisible. I knocked again, harder this time. My fist against the door frame created hollow sounds that echoed down the empty hallway. Ellison walked to the whiteboard and wrote the time in large numbers. 8:50. The bell rang immediately after. Her voice carried through the door in measured teacher tones. You have 90 minutes for this examination. Show all work clearly. I stood in the hallway holding 5 exam booklets nobody needed, watching my classmates take a test that would determine my entire future. The door stayed locked. I walked to the main office in a daze. My footsteps sounded different now, heavier, like I was carrying invisible weight. The secretary looked up from her computer screen with mild interest. I explained the situation as clearly as possible. The errand, the timing, the locked door, the test I couldn't take. She listened with growing confusion. Her eyebrows drew together like she was solving a puzzle with missing pieces. That seems very unusual. Let me call down there. She She dialed Ellison's extension and let it ring 12 times. Each ring felt like a countdown to academic disaster. No answer. Teachers don't typically answer their phones during examinations. You'll have to wait until the period ends. But I can't miss this test. It's worth 40% of my quarter grade. I understand your concern completely, but district policy is very clear about tardiness. The irony hit me like physical pain. Policy was being used to justify what policy had caused. I asked to speak with the principal. Mrs. Garcia was in a district meeting until noon. The assistant principal was handling a disciplinary issue. The guidance counselor was at a conference. Every adult who might help me was conveniently unavailable. I spent the next hour sitting on a plastic chair that squeaked every time I shifted position, watching the office clock tick past my academic future. Other students began finishing early around 9:45. They slipped past me in the hallway with expressions that said everything. We saw what happened. We know what she did to you. But seeing and proving are completely different things in the adult world. Julian stopped by the office on his way to second period. That was completely unfair, he whispered. Did you finish? Yeah, but I kept thinking about you stuck out here. Sarah Ortega appeared next. Her face was pale from test stress. Ellison sent you away on purpose, she said quietly. Can you prove that? We all saw it happen, but I don't know if that matters. More classmates trickled past. Each one confirmed what I already knew. Ellison had engineered my absence, created a situation where following her instructions guaranteed breaking her rules. But adult authority doesn't operate on student testimony. At 10:20 exactly, Ellison's door finally opened. She appeared in the doorway like nothing unusual had occurred. Her hair was still perfectly arranged. Her expression remained calm and professional. Students filed past her carrying completed exams. Some looked at me with sympathy. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Ellison waited until the hallway cleared completely. Policy is clear, she said in the same tone she used for lesson instructions. The bell determines attendance status. She held out her hand expectantly. I gave her the 5 exam booklets I'd been carrying for 98 minutes. The booklets she'd never needed in the first place. But you sent me to get these. I was following your direct instruction. I have no recollection of sending anyone anywhere. The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. Delivered with the confidence of someone who knew their word would be believed over mine. 23 people saw you tell me to go to the copy room. Students misremember details when they're stressed about examinations. Ellison turned and walked back into her classroom. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood in the empty hallway holding the truth that nobody with power wanted to hear. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom, asking how the calculus midterm went, reminding me that my scholarship interview was next week. I stared at the message for a long time. How do you explain that 3.5 years of perfect grades just got destroyed by a teacher who lied about sending you on an errand? How do you tell your parents that their college savings plan might not matter anymore because one adult decided to abuse their authority? The guidance office would open after lunch. Maybe Mrs. Brooks could help. Maybe she'd listen to student testimony. Maybe she'd care that Ellison had rigged the system. But probably not. Adults protect other adults. Students get blamed for the chaos that adults create. I walked to my next class carrying the weight of a zero I hadn't earned. The weight of a future that had just been stolen from me. The weight of learning that fairness is optional when you're 17. I was a senior at Lincoln High with a 3.97 GPA that meant everything to my family. College applications were due in 8 weeks. Early admission deadlines loomed even closer. One failed test could drop my calculus grade below the 3.8 threshold required for state scholarship eligibility. Without that money, my parents couldn't afford to send me anywhere decent. 3.5 years of perfect attendance and flawless homework suddenly felt fragile, like a house of cards that one vindictive teacher could collapse with a single breath. Ellison had just blown that house down. I waited outside Ellison's classroom until the hallway emptied completely. She emerged at 10:25 carrying her coffee mug and gradebook, the same casual posture she maintained every day, like destroying a student's future was just another item on her morning checklist. Mrs. Ellison, I need to talk about what just happened. She paused and looked at me with mild annoyance. The expression teachers use when students interrupt their perfectly planned schedules. What about it? You sent me for exam booklets that nobody needed. I followed your instructions exactly. The door was locked when I returned. Ellison sipped her coffee and checked her watch, like she had somewhere more important to be. Rules are rules. The bell determines attendance. You were not in your seat because you told me to leave. I have no recollection of sending anyone anywhere. The lie hit me like cold water, delivered with the confidence of someone who knew their authority would shield them from consequences. 23 students saw you give me that instruction. Students often misinterpret directions when they're nervous about examinations. She turned and walked toward the faculty lounge. Our conversation was apparently over. I stood there processing what had just happened. Ellison wasn't denying the timing. She wasn't claiming the door malfunctioned. She was pretending the entire sequence never occurred. Julian appeared at my shoulder. He'd been waiting around the corner. She's lying, he said quietly. You saw her send me? We all did. Right at 8:42. She looked straight at you and said to get extra booklets. Sarah Ortega joined us next. Her face was still pale from test anxiety. That was the most obvious setup I've ever seen. She waited until 8 minutes before class started. Why would she do that? Because she wanted you to be late. More classmates gathered around us. David Rodriguez, Jessica Kim, Alex Martinez, each one confirming the same timeline. Ellison had deliberately sent me away minutes before an exam she knew I couldn't afford to miss. Has she done this before? I asked. The group exchanged glances, like they were debating whether to share dangerous information. Jessica spoke first. Last semester she failed Tommy Ortega for being 2 minutes late to a final. Tommy Ortega is Sarah's brother? Yeah, he had perfect attendance all year. Then one day his car wouldn't start. He ran 6 blocks and made it to class at 8:02. Ellison marked him absent for the day. 0 on the final. His grade dropped from A to C. My stomach started to feel sick. This wasn't an isolated incident. David added his own story. She's been doing weird stuff all year, giving conflicting instructions, changing assignment due dates without notice. Remember when she told half the class to research one topic and half to research another, then acted like we all should have known which was correct? Or the time she moved the test date up by 2 days but only told students in her first period class? A pattern was emerging. Ellison had been systematically sabotaging students for months. Why haven't you reported this? Julian laughed bitterly. To who? The administration loves her. She's been teacher of the year twice. Parents think we're just making excuses for bad grades. And she's careful. Never does anything that looks obviously wrong to adults. Sarah nodded. She always has plausible explanations. Students forgot the instructions. Students didn't pay attention. Students are trying to blame others for their own mistakes. But you all saw what happened today. We saw it, but will anyone believe us? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire we couldn't put out. Ellison had spent years building her reputation as a demanding but fair educator. One incident of student testimony wouldn't topple that carefully constructed image, especially when her version painted me as irresponsible and dishonest. What am I supposed to do? Document everything, get witnesses to write statements, build a case that even adults can't ignore, and hope she doesn't destroy anyone else while you're gathering evidence. The warning bell rang for third period. Our impromptu meeting needed to end before teachers started asking questions about students congregating in hallways. But something had shifted in those 10 minutes. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't irresponsible, I wasn't imagining a conspiracy that didn't exist. Ellison had deliberately sabotaged my exam, and based on my classmates' stories, I wasn't her first victim. She was running a systematic campaign against students who threatened her sense of control. The question was whether anyone with actual authority would believe that a respected teacher was capable of such calculated cruelty, or if they dismiss it as typical teenage paranoia and excuse-making. Adults tend to trust other adults, especially adults with impressive credentials and positive performance reviews. But the truth was the truth regardless of who wanted to hear it. Ellison had rigged the game. Now I needed to prove it before she destroyed someone else's future. Mrs. Garcia finally returned from her district meeting at 2:15 p.m. I'd been waiting in the main office for 3 hours, watching secretaries answer phones and shuffle paperwork while my academic future hung in limbo. The principal's office smelled like coffee and industrial carpet. Motivational posters covered the walls with slogans about excellence and achievement. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mrs. Garcia listened to my story with the patient expression administrators use when dealing with student complaints, nodding at appropriate intervals, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. I explained the timeline carefully. The errand at 8:42, the copy room delay, the locked door at 8:49, missing a midterm worth 40% of my quarter grade. That does sound frustrating. Let me get Mrs. Ellison's perspective on what happened. She picked up her phone and dialed Ellison's extension. Could you come to my office, please? I need to discuss an incident from this morning. Ellison arrived within 5 minutes, her usual professional demeanor intact. Navy blazer, sensible shoes, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She sat down across from me like we were meeting for the first time. Mrs. Garcia summarized my complaint without taking sides. A student claimed to have been sent on an errand that caused him to miss an examination. Ellison listened with apparent concern, occasionally shaking her head with what looked like genuine confusion. I'm sorry, but I have no recollection of sending anyone anywhere this morning. Her voice carried the authority of 15 years in the classroom, the confidence of someone who'd never been successfully challenged by student testimony. The examination began promptly at 8:50 as scheduled. All students present were seated and ready to proceed. But I was following your direct instruction, I protested. Ellison turned to face me with the expression teachers use for disruptive children. I understand you're disappointed about missing the test, but I cannot take responsibility for misunderstood instructions. I didn't misunderstand anything. You looked at me and said to get extra booklets. Students often hear what they expect to hear when they're anxious about examinations. Mrs. Garcia made more notes on her legal pad. Her expression remained carefully neutral. Were there any witnesses to this alleged instruction? 23 students saw the entire thing happen. Ellison smiled sadly, like she was dealing with a troubled child who needed gentle correction. Group dynamics can create false memories. When students are stressed, they sometimes convince each other that events occurred differently than they actually did. This isn't a false memory. You deliberately sent me away. That's a very serious accusation. Are you suggesting I intentionally sabotaged your examination? The way she phrased it made me sound paranoid, like I was inventing elaborate conspiracies to avoid taking responsibility for my own failures. Mrs. Garcia intervened before I could respond. Let's focus on solutions. Mrs. Ellison, would you be willing to allow a makeup examination? I understand the student's disappointment, but policy exists for important reasons. Making exceptions undermines the integrity of our assessment process. Other students completed the examination under proper conditions. Allowing a makeup would be fundamentally unfair to them. Ellison's logic sounded reasonable to adult ears. She was protecting academic standards, maintaining consistency, ensuring fairness for all students. Except none of it was true. What about the 5 exam booklets I brought back? Everyone already had materials. Ellison paused for exactly 1 second. Long enough for me to notice, but short enough to seem natural. I asked several students to check if we had adequate supplies. Standard procedure before major examinations. Another lie delivered with practiced smoothness. You specifically told me to go to the copy room at 8:42, 8 minutes before class started. I may have mentioned supply concerns to multiple students. If you chose to leave the classroom that close to the examination period, that reflects poor judgment on your part. She was rewriting history in real time, transforming her deliberate sabotage into my personal failure. Mrs. Garcia closed her notepad and leaned back in her chair. This seems to be a case of miscommunication. Mrs. Ellison, I appreciate your commitment to maintaining academic standards. And I understand your frustration, she said to me. But personal responsibility is an important lesson. Perhaps this experience will help you make better choices in the future. The meeting was over. Ellison had successfully painted me as an irresponsible student trying to blame others for my own mistakes. Her word carried more weight than mine. Her reputation provided more credibility than my testimony. She stood up and smoothed her blazer with satisfaction. I hope you'll use this as a learning opportunity. Sometimes life presents unexpected challenges. How we respond defines our character. Ellison left the office with the confident stride of someone who just won a game they'd rigged from the beginning. Mrs. Garcia offered me a sympathetic smile. I know this feels unfair, but Mrs. Ellison has been teaching here for 15 years. She's one of our most respected faculty members. She's lying. I understand you believe that, but without concrete evidence, there's not much I can do. What about student witnesses? Student testimony is valuable, but it needs to be corroborated by objective evidence. I walked out of the principal's office with a 0 still attached to my transcript. Ellison had successfully gaslighted both me and the administration in under 20 minutes, but she'd also made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how determined I was to prove the truth. That night, I started building my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. First step was witness statements. I texted Julian, Sarah, and Lucas asking them to write down exactly what they saw that morning. Julian responded within an hour. His statement was detailed and precise. At approximately 8:42 a.m., Mrs. Ellison looked directly at you and said she needed 5 extra exam booklets from the copy room. She said right now and pointed toward the door. Everyone heard her. You grabbed the hall pass and left immediately. Sarah's statement arrived next, even more specific about timing and Ellison's exact words. Mrs. Ellison waited until 8:42 to send you away. She knew the exam started at 8:50. She looked at the clock before giving you the instruction. This was deliberate. Lucas's statement focused on Ellison's Ellison's behavior after I left. She locked the door manually at 8:49. I watched her turn the deadbolt from inside. Then she started the exam early while you were still in the hallway. 3 independent witnesses, same timeline, same conclusion. Ellison had engineered my absence, but when I showed the statements to Mrs. Garcia the next morning, she remained unmoved. Student testimony is valuable, but these are your friends. They might feel pressure to support your version of events. They're describing what actually happened. I'm sure they believe that, but memory can be unreliable, especially when emotions are involved. Step 2 was physical evidence. The 5 exam booklets Ellison had sent me to retrieve. I pulled them from my backpack during our meeting. Still pristine, still unused, still completely unnecessary since everyone already had materials. These prove she sent me for something we didn't need. Mrs. Garcia examined the booklets with mild interest. Teachers sometimes prepare extra supplies as a precaution. That's good planning, not evidence of wrongdoing. But why send me at 8:42? Why not earlier in the day? Perhaps she realized we might need additional materials at that moment. Every piece of evidence was being filtered through Ellison's reputation. Her 15 years of service created a shield that deflected obvious facts. Step 3 required more creativity. I asked the custodian, Mr. Williams, to show me how Ellison's classroom door worked. He demonstrated the mechanism with professional pride. The deadbolt could only be engaged manually from inside. No automatic locking system. No way for the door to secure itself. Someone has to turn this deliberately, he explained. It don't lock by accident. I took photos of the door mechanism, documented how the deadbolt operated, proved that Ellison had made a conscious choice to lock me out. When I presented this evidence, Mrs. Garcia's response was predictably dismissive. Teachers lock their doors during examinations for security purposes. That's standard protocol, but she locked it while I was following her instructions. If you were in the hallway during an examination, the door should be locked. Circular logic. Ellison's action was justified because I was where her action had forced me to be. Step 4 involved filing a formal records request for Ellison's lesson plans. Massachusetts law required teachers to maintain detailed instructional schedules. Every activity needed documentation for state compliance. The lesson plan for exam day showed 90 minutes of testing time. Nothing about supply runs. No mention of sending students anywhere. Either Ellison had failed to document a legitimate activity, or the activity never happened. Lesson plans are guidelines, Mrs. Garcia explained when I showed her the missing entry. Teachers make real-time adjustments based on classroom needs. So she just decided randomly at 8:42 that we needed extra booklets? Experienced educators develop intuition about classroom requirements. I was learning that administrative loyalty ran deeper than evidence. Ellison's colleagues would rationalize anything to protect her reputation. Step 5 came from an unexpected source. My older sister Lisa had graduated from Lincoln High 3 years earlier. She remembered Ellison differently than the current version. She used to be strict but fair. Something changed around 2 years ago. She started getting weird about control. Lisa connected me with her friend David, who'd been in Ellison's class the previous year. She pulled similar stuff with me, he said over the phone. Nothing as obvious as your situation, but she'd give confusing instructions, then blame us when things went wrong. Did you report it? My parents tried. Administration said I was making excuses for poor performance. David's story sounded familiar. Ellison targeting students, then hiding behind administrative protection when challenged. She failed 3 kids in my class for questionable reasons. All of them had been doing well until she decided they were problems. A pattern was emerging. Ellison had been escalating her control tactics for months. My situation was just the most blatant example, but when I shared David's testimony with Mrs. Garcia, she remained unconvinced. That's secondhand information from a disgruntled former student, not reliable evidence. My parents had been watching this process with growing frustration. Dad took time off work to attend our next meeting with administration. 5 pieces of evidence all point to the same conclusion, he said firmly. How much proof do you need? Mr. Peterson, I understand your concern, but we have to consider Mrs. Ellison's exemplary record. Her record doesn't matter if she's sabotaging students. That's a very serious accusation. We need overwhelming evidence to support such claims. Mom had been making phone calls to district officials, school board members, anyone who might listen to our concerns. The responses were uniformly polite and unhelpful. Ellison's reputation preceded every conversation. She's teacher of the year, one board member explained. Parents consistently praise her high standards. High standards don't include deliberately sabotaging students. Are you certain that's what happened? Sometimes these situations involve miscommunication. The system was designed to protect teachers from student complaints. Every safeguard favored the adult with institutional power. Ellison had chosen her target carefully, a senior with college applications pending, someone who couldn't afford to be seen as a troublemaker. But she'd underestimated my family's determination. Dad scheduled meetings with every district administrator. Mom documented every phone call and email exchange. They were building their own paper trail. We're not going away, Dad told Mrs. Garcia during our 4th meeting. This is about justice. I respect your persistence, but sometimes we have to accept that misunderstandings occur. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated sabotage. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 witness statements, physical proof of unnecessary errands, door mechanism documentation, missing lesson plan entries, pattern testimony from former students. But none of it mattered to people determined to protect Ellison's reputation. They'd rather believe in an elaborate student conspiracy than accept that a respected teacher had abused her authority. The bureaucratic stonewalling was wearing everyone down. Mom was losing sleep over phone calls to unresponsive officials. Dad was burning vacation days for meetings that went nowhere. I was watching my family sacrifice their peace of mind for my academic future. Ellison had turned one moment of abuse into weeks of systematic torture for my entire family, but we were building something she hadn't anticipated. A documented record of administrative failure. A paper trail that might matter to people higher up the chain. The district superintendent, the school board president, the state education department. Someone with actual authority would eventually have to explain why obvious evidence was being ignored. Ellison had won every battle so far, but the war was far from over. 3 weeks after the exam incident, Mrs. Garcia finally offered a compromise. We've discussed your situation extensively with Mrs. Ellison. She's agreed to allow a makeup examination. Relief flooded through me until she continued. However, the makeup score will be averaged with the 0 you received for missing the original exam. I stared at her across the desk. Averaged? This reflects the reality that you were absent during the scheduled examination period. Because Ellison deliberately sent me away, the circumstances remain disputed. This compromise acknowledges both perspectives. The math was devastating. Even if I scored perfectly on the makeup exam, averaging 100 with 0 would give me a 50. My quarter grade would drop from A to C. That's not a compromise, that's still punishment for something I didn't do. It's the best accommodation we can offer given the conflicting accounts counts. Ellison had won again. She'd destroyed my grade while appearing reasonable to administrators. The news spread through school faster than I expected. By lunch, everyone knew about the makeup arrangement and what it really meant. Some classmates were supportive. Julian and Sarah continued defending my version of events. Lucas offered to retake his written statement for any official who would listen, but others started keeping their distance. I can't get involved in this drama, Jessica told me quietly. I need Ellison for a college recommendation letter. What if she does the same thing to you? I'll be extra careful. Arrive earlier. Not give her any reason to target me. Fear was spreading through Ellison's other classes. Students were modifying their behavior to avoid becoming her next victim. David Rodriguez started arriving at 7:30 every morning. Sarah Ortega stopped asking questions during class. Alex Martinez turned in assignments days early to avoid any deadline confusion. Ellison's tactics were working perfectly. She'd created a climate of terror disguised as high academic standards. My parents were burning out from the constant advocacy. Dad had used up his vacation time for school meetings. Mom was making 3 phone calls a day to district officials who never called back. Maybe we should just accept the makeup offer, Mom suggested during dinner. You could still pass the class with a C average instead of an A. That kills my scholarship eligibility. There are other scholarships, other opportunities. I could see the exhaustion in her face. Weeks of fighting an unresponsive bureaucracy had worn down her determination. Dad was still angry but pragmatic. We've proven our point. Everyone knows what really happened. Knowing and admitting are different things. Sometimes you have to pick your battles. The social cost was expanding beyond my family. Word had reached the parent network that we were challenging a respected teacher. Some parents supported us privately but avoided public association. Others whispered that we were troublemakers trying to blame educators for student failures. Ellison's reputation was shielding her from community accountability. My stress was manifesting in physical symptoms. Sleep deprivation from anxiety, headaches from constant tension, loss of appetite during what should have been my senior year highlight reel. College application deadlines were approaching. Early admission interviews were scheduled. Everything that should have been exciting was overshadowed by Ellison's sabotage. You're becoming known as that student, my guidance counselor warned during our meeting. The one who causes problems. I'm the student who was sabotaged by a teacher. That's your perspective. But colleges will see someone who couldn't handle academic pressure. The isolation was getting worse. Former friends worried that associating with me might damage their own relationships with Ellison. Teachers in other departments maintained careful neutrality. They couldn't openly support me without risking collegial relationships. Ellison walked through school with unchanged confidence, her reputation intact, her authority unquestioned. She'd successfully painted me as a disruptive student, trying to avoid responsibility for missing an important exam. But she'd also made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I would eventually give up and accept her version of events. Instead, her stonewalling was teaching me something valuable about how power protects itself, and how much evidence it takes to challenge institutional authority. The makeup exam was scheduled for Monday morning. I had 3 days to decide whether to accept Ellison's rigged compromise or continue fighting for actual justice. 3 days to choose between damaged grades and damaged principles. Ellison thought she'd cornered me into accepting defeat. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Mrs. Brooks, my guidance counselor, pulled up my transcript on her computer screen and started calculating numbers that would determine my entire future. Current GPA is 3.97. If Ellison's makeup exam gets averaged with the 0, your calculus grade drops to approximately 2.1 for the quarter. She clicked through different scenarios with mathematical precision. That brings your cumulative GPA down to 3.72, below the 3.8 threshold for state merit scholarship eligibility. The numbers felt like a medical diagnosis, terminal but delivered in calm professional tones. What about college applications? 3 schools have sent likely letters based on your current academic standing. Those offers typically include language about maintaining performance through graduation. Mrs. Brooks turned her monitor so I could see the harsh reality in spreadsheet form. A significant grade drop in senior year sends a concerning signal to admissions committees. Even if I explain what happened, you could include context in your application essays, but colleges receive thousands of explanations for academic problems. Most sound like excuse-making. The walls of her office felt like they were closing in. Motivational posters about college success mocked me from every direction. MIT specifically mentioned your consistent academic performance in their likely letter. Boston University highlighted your perfect attendance record. Ellison had weaponized punctuality to destroy the very thing she was supposed to cultivate in students. What are my options? Take the makeup exam and hope for damage control, or continue fighting and risk missing more class time. The guidance office phone rang constantly with calls from other seniors handling normal college application stress. Their biggest concerns were essay topics and interview schedules. I was calculating whether my academic future was worth salvaging. My parents scheduled a meeting with Superintendent Williams after district-level appeals went nowhere. Dad took another day off work for the conference. Williams listened to our presentation with a polite attention administrators reserved for persistent complainers. Mom had prepared a timeline of events with supporting documentation. The superintendent reviewed our evidence for 15 minutes before responding. Mrs. Ellison has served this district with distinction for 15 years. Her performance evaluations are consistently exemplary. Performance evaluations don't cover deliberate sabotage of students. That's an extraordinary accusation requiring extraordinary proof. Dad leaned forward in his chair. We've provided witness statements, physical evidence, and documentation of policy violations. Student testimony is valuable but not conclusive. Physical evidence can be interpreted multiple ways. Williams closed our folder with administrative finality. We stand behind our faculty. Mrs. Ellison's reputation speaks for itself. What about our son's reputation? His academic future? Sometimes situations arise that test our character. How we respond defines who we become. The same meaningless platitudes Ellison had used to justify destroying my grades. We left the superintendent's office with nothing but confirmation that the district would protect its employee over its students. That evening, my parents had the conversation I'd been dreading. We need to consider hiring an attorney, Dad said quietly. Mom pulled out estimates she'd gathered from education law firms. The consultation fees alone were staggering. $1,500 just to review the case, $5,000 minimum to file formal complaints. We could refinance the house, Dad suggested, and pay legal fees instead of college tuition. The irony was devastating. Ellison's sabotage was forcing us to choose between fighting her and affording the education she'd tried to deny me. Maybe we should just take the makeup exam, I said finally. Absolutely not, Mom replied with surprising force. This is about more than grades now. It's about preventing her from doing this to other students, Dad added, but I could see the strain in their faces. Weeks of advocacy had exhausted their emotional reserves. The financial pressure was adding another layer of stress to an already impossible situation. Ellison had calculated her attack perfectly. Target a student student whose family couldn't afford prolonged legal battles. Create a situation where fighting back was more expensive than accepting injustice. My college fund was sitting in a savings account marked for tuition and books. Now it might go to lawyers and court fees instead. The state scholarship would have covered full tuition at UMass. Without it, we'd need private loans with interest rates that would follow me for decades. Ellison's 5-minute manipulation would cost my family tens of thousands of dollars in the long run. Sleep became impossible. I lay awake calculating different scenarios, makeup exam scores, GPA projections, college application timelines. Every path led back to the same conclusion. Ellison held all the power. Adults protected adults. Students absorbed the consequences of institutional failure. My phone buzzed with text messages from classmates offering sympathy and support. But sympathy wouldn't restore my GPA. Support wouldn't pay for college. Ellison walked through school with unchanged confidence. Her authority intact. Her tactics successful. She'd turned education into warfare and positioned herself as the only one with weapons. The makeup exam was scheduled for Monday. 3 days to decide whether to surrender or find some way to prove what everyone knew but no one would acknowledge. 3 days to figure out how to fight institutional power with student resources. Ellison thought she'd cornered me into accepting defeat. But desperation can be motivating. When you have nothing left to lose, taking risks becomes easier. She'd underestimated how far I'd go to expose the truth, and how creative teenagers can be when adults refuse to listen to reason. Julian and I met at school Saturday morning, with a plan that felt like breaking and entering even though we had legitimate access. The building was open for weekend activities, drama club rehearsals, basketball practice, academic teams preparing for competitions. We walked to Ellison's classroom with purpose that probably looked suspicious to any teachers who might notice. "You sure about this?" Julian asked as we approached room 237. "We need objective proof, something no administrator can dismiss or reinterpret." The hallway was empty except for distant sounds from the gymnasium. Ellison's door stood unlocked since she wasn't there to guard it. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "This is Saturday, November 14th, approximately 10:30 a.m. We're documenting the door mechanism in Mrs. Ellison's classroom." Julian positioned himself inside the room while I stayed in the hallway, the same positions we'd been in during the exam incident. "First test. Can the door lock itself automatically?" Julian let the door close naturally. I turned the handle from outside. It opened easily. Door does not lock automatically when closed. We repeated the test 5 times. Same result every time. The door remained unlocked unless someone made a deliberate choice to secure it. Second test. Manual deadbolt operation. Julian demonstrated the locking mechanism from inside, a thumb turn that required intentional pressure to engage. The deadbolt cannot be activated accidentally. Someone has to choose to turn it. I filmed the mechanism from multiple angles. Close-ups of the thumb turn, wide shots showing the door frame. Evidence that no jury could misinterpret. Third test. Timeline reconstruction. We recreated the morning of the exam. Julian stood at Ellison's desk. I positioned myself in the hallway outside. 8:49 a.m. I returned from the copy room. Try to enter the classroom. I turned the handle and pushed against the door. Door is locked. Julian, can you show how Ellison would have secured it? Julian walked to the door and turned the deadbolt with deliberate motion. She had to make this choice. Walk to the door, turn the lock, prevent me from entering. The video evidence was undeniable. Ellison had actively excluded me from the exam she knew I couldn't afford to miss. Fourth test. Timing analysis. Julian stood at the front of the room like Ellison during exam morning. From this position, she could see me approaching through the hallway window. She had time to unlock the door if she wanted to. Instead, she chose to keep it locked. We documented the sightlines from Ellison's desk to the hallway, proved she'd seen me returning, and decided to maintain the barrier she'd created. Final test. Alternative explanations. We explored every possible innocent explanation for the locked door. Security protocol during exams? Other teachers left their doors unlocked during testing periods. Automatic locking system? Our tests proved the mechanism required manual operation. Accidental engagement? The thumb turn was too stiff to activate without deliberate pressure. No innocent explanation fits the evidence. This was calculated sabotage. I ended the recording with a statement for any administrator who might review the footage. Mrs. Ellison deliberately locked me out of an examination after sending me on an unnecessary errand. This video proves she made conscious choices that destroyed my academic standing. Julian and I left the building with 23 minutes of documented evidence that no reasonable person could dismiss. Video proof that Ellison's door required manual locking. Demonstration that she'd seen me returning from her errand. Timeline reconstruction showing her deliberate choice to exclude me. This wasn't student testimony that could be dismissed as biased. This wasn't physical evidence that could be reinterpreted. This was mechanical reality captured on video. Ellison had finally been caught in a lie that couldn't be explained away by administrative loyalty. The door mechanism didn't care about her reputation. The thumb turn didn't know about her 15 years of service. Physics was objective in ways that human testimony apparently wasn't. Monday morning, I would walk into Mrs. Garcia's office with irrefutable proof of Ellison's sabotage. Evidence that even the most determined bureaucrat couldn't rationalize or dismiss. Ellison had built her defense on the assumption that student testimony was unreliable. She never considered that the classroom itself might testify against her. Monday morning, I walked into Mrs. Garcia's office carrying my phone like a weapon loaded with truth. "I have new evidence about the Ellison situation." She looked up from her coffee with a weary expression of someone who'd hoped this issue had died quietly over the weekend. "What kind of evidence?" I connected my phone to her computer monitor and started the video. 23 minutes of documented proof that Ellison's classroom door could only be locked manually. Mrs. Garcia watched in silence as Julian demonstrated the thumb turn mechanism. Her expression shifted from polite attention to genuine concern as the implications became clear. "This shows Mrs. Ellison had to actively choose to lock you out. She saw me coming back from her errand. She could have unlocked the door. Instead, she kept it secured." The video continued with our timeline reconstruction. Every possible innocent explanation systematically eliminated by mechanical reality. "I need to discuss this with Mrs. Ellison immediately." She called Ellison's extension and requested an immediate meeting. No explanation over the phone, just administrative urgency that suggested serious trouble. Ellison arrived within 10 minutes. Same professional demeanor she'd maintained throughout our previous confrontations. But something flickered in her expression when she saw my phone connected to the monitor. "We have new information about the exam incident," Mrs. Garcia began carefully. She played selected clips from our video evidence, the door mechanism tests, the manual locking demonstration, the timeline reconstruction. Ellison watched with increasing tension. Her carefully controlled mask started developing cracks. "I always lock my classroom door during examinations," she said finally. "It's standard security protocol, but you locked it while this student was following your direct instruction. I have no recollection of sending anyone anywhere." The same lie she'd been telling for weeks, but now it was contradicted by mechanical evidence evidence she couldn't explain away. Mrs. Garcia paused the video at the moment Julian demonstrated the deliberate thumb turn required to engage the deadbolt. This mechanism cannot activate accidentally. Someone has to choose to turn it. Ellison's composure was cracking visibly. Her voice carried less authority than usual. Security procedures require locked doors during testing periods. Did you see this student returning from the copy room? I was focused on exam administration. The video shows clear sightlines from your desk to the hallway. You would have seen him approaching. Ellison fell silent. Her usual confident responses replaced by defensive evasion. Mrs. Garcia made a phone call to the district office. Spoke in administrative code that suggested escalation beyond school-level authority. Superintendent Williams wants to meet with all parties this afternoon. Legal counsel will be present. The words legal counsel hit Ellison like physical blows. Her face went pale as the implications registered. This was no longer about student complaints or administrative discretion. This was about potential legal liability for deliberate educational sabotage. The afternoon meeting took place in the district conference room. Formal setting with recording equipment and legal representatives. Superintendent Williams reviewed our video evidence with the district's attorney. Both took extensive notes while Ellison sat increasingly isolated at the far end of the table. My parents flanked me like protective shields. Dad's anger was barely contained. Mom documented everything in real time. Mrs. Ellison, can you explain your decision to lock the classroom door while this student was completing your assigned task? I follow standard security protocols during all examinations. Did you instruct this student to retrieve exam booklets at 8:42 a.m.? Long pause. Ellison's usual smooth confidence completely gone. I may have mentioned supply concerns to several students. The lesson plan for that day shows no record of supply issues or copy room tasks. Plans change based on real-time classroom needs. The attorney leaned forward with practiced precision. Mrs. Ellison, are you aware that deliberately excluding a student from required assessments could constitute educational malpractice? Ellison's face flushed red. The legal implications were finally penetrating her defensive shell. I would never deliberately harm a student's academic standing. Yet video evidence shows you actively prevented this student from accessing an examination after sending him on an unnecessary errand. The timing was coincidental. Coincidental timing that followed a pattern of similar incidents with other students? The attorney had clearly reviewed our documentation about Ellison's previous targeting behaviors. Ellison looked around the room for support that wasn't coming. Her colleagues maintained professional distance. Her administration was protecting the district rather than defending her actions. What resolution are you seeking? Williams asked my parents. Full retake without penalty, Dad responded immediately. And assurance this won't happen to other students, Mom added. Policy changes to prevent future abuse of authority, I said quietly. Williams conferred with the attorney in whispered tones. Ellison sat in silence, watching her 15-year career hang in balance. We're prepared to offer the following resolution. Complete retake of the examination under neutral supervision. Grade recorded without reference to the original incident. Relief flooded through me so fast I nearly collapsed. Additionally, we're implementing new policies. No student errands within 15 minutes of examination periods. Backup proctors required for all high-stakes testing. Ellison's face showed she understood what was happening. Her authority was being systematically dismantled to prevent future sabotage. Mrs. Ellison will be removed from all standardized testing responsibilities pending review of these incidents. The meeting ended with Ellison's power officially curtailed. She left the conference room in defeated silence. 3 weeks later, I sat in the library conference room with a neutral proctor from another school. The retake exam spread before me like a chance at redemption. The questions were harder than the original test. Ellison's replacement had ensured I couldn't benefit from extra preparation time, but I knew this material better than my own name. 3.5 years of perfect study habits couldn't be destroyed by one vindictive teacher. I worked through calculus problems with focused intensity. Every equation felt like striking back against injustice. Every correct answer was proof that truth could survive institutional betrayal. The proctor collected my exam at exactly the 90-minute mark. Professional neutrality that felt revolutionary after weeks of Ellison's manipulation. Results will be available tomorrow morning. That night I slept better than I had in months. Whatever happened, I'd done everything possible to restore my academic standing. The phone call came at 7:30 a.m. Mrs. Garcia's voice carried relief and something approaching apology. 94%. Excellent work. The grade would still be averaged with the original 0 per district policy. 47% overall, but enough to pass the class and maintain minimum scholarship eligibility. Ellison's sabotage had been contained but not eliminated. The system's compromise still punished me for her misconduct. But I was alive academically, wounded but not destroyed. The new policies went into effect immediately. No more last-minute errands before major assessments. Backup proctors for every examination. Clear protocols that prevented individual teachers from wielding absolute power. Ellison remained at Lincoln High, but with dramatically reduced authority. Her testing privileges revoked. Her reputation permanently damaged among colleagues who'd witnessed her legal confrontation. She'd tried to destroy one student's future and ended up limiting her own instead. The retake exam results changed everything and nothing simultaneously. My 94% score averaged with Ellison's imposed 0 gave me a 47% on the midterm. Passing, but devastating to my overall calculus grade. The quarter ended with a C+ instead of the A I'd maintained for 3.5 years. My cumulative GPA dropped to 3.74, just below state scholarship eligibility. But the district's new policies created lasting change that mattered beyond my individual situation. No student errands within 15 minutes of any examination. Backup proctors required for all high-stakes assessments. Clear appeals process for testing irregularities. Ellison's authority was quietly dismantled piece by piece. Testing responsibilities transferred to other faculty. Supervision required for all her major assessments. She remained at Lincoln High, but neutered of the power she'd abused so systematically. The parent network learned what had happened despite official discretion. Ellison's reputation shifted from respected educator to cautionary tale about unchecked authority. College applications became an exercise in damage control rather than celebration. My guidance counselor helped craft supplemental essays explaining the grade anomaly without sounding like excuse-making. Frame it as resilience under adversity, Mrs. Brooks advised. Show how you fought for justice rather than accepted unfairness. MIT's likely letter was withdrawn after my transcript update. Boston University maintained interest but without merit scholarship consideration. I ended up at UMass Amherst with partial aid instead of full ride opportunities I'd earned through 3 years of perfect performance. Ellison's 5 minutes of sabotage cost my family approximately $40,000 in lost scholarship money, but something unexpected emerged from the wreckage of my senior year. The documentation skills I'd developed while building evidence against Ellison translated perfectly to college research research methods. The persistence required to challenge institutional authority became valuable in academic settings where original thinking was rewarded. The advocacy experience taught me how bureaucratic systems protect themselves and how much evidence is required to force change. Most importantly, I learned that fighting injustice was possible even when power seemed absolutely stacked against truth. Other students at Lincoln High began speaking up about unfair treatment they'd previously accepted as normal. The culture of administrative deference started shifting toward accountability. Ellison tried to maintain her classroom authority, but found students less willing to tolerate arbitrary rule changes or confusing instructions. The teacher who'd seemed untouchable was now watched carefully by colleagues and administrators who'd witnessed her near-legal catastrophe. Her 15-year reputation couldn't survive video evidence of deliberate student sabotage. The final irony was perfect. Ellison had tried to teach me about consequences and personal responsibility. Instead, she'd learned that actions have consequences, even for respected teachers who abuse their authority. The system that had protected her for months was forced to protect itself by limiting her power. Justice arrived slowly and imperfectly, but it arrived. My transcript would always carry the scar of Ellison's sabotage, but the policies preventing future abuse would protect students for years to come. Sometimes fighting for what's right costs you personally while benefiting everyone else. That felt like a fair trade. 5 years later, I wrote my law school admissions essay about Ellison and the semester she tried to destroy my academic future. The admissions committee at Harvard Law called it compelling evidence of advocacy skills and institutional analysis. Ellison had meant to teach me about accepting authority without question. Instead, she taught me that authority without accountability was just another form of tyranny. The video evidence I'd gathered became a case study in my undergraduate research methods course. Documentation techniques that started as desperate self-defense evolved into academic expertise. The persistence required to challenge Ellison's lies translated perfectly to legal research and constitutional analysis. Most surprisingly, the semester I'd considered my greatest failure became the foundation for my greatest success. Law school professors valued students who'd actually fought institutional injustice rather than just studied it theoretically. Ellison retired quietly during my junior year of college. The policies created after our confrontation remained in place, protecting students she'd never get another chance to sabotage. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best preparation for everything that follows. Ellison thought she was destroying my future. Instead, she was building it.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.